If you have diabetes and your blood sugar keeps running high every single morning, even though you're taking your medication, even though you're watching what you eat, even though you feel like you're doing everything right, I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes. Because the answer might not be what you think. It might not be about what you're eating. It might be about what you stopped eating years ago. There's one food that millions of people with diabetes have quietly removed from their lives, not because their doctor told them to, not because it was making their blood sugar worse, but because of a fear that, as it turns out, may have been doing more harm than good. And today we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about eggs, why they may actually be one of the smartest foods you can eat after 60 if you have diabetes, where most people go wrong when they do eat them, and how to use them correctly to avoid those silent blood sugar spikes that damage your body day after day without you even knowing it. Because here's the thing, it's not just about eating eggs, it's about knowing how to eat them. A while back, I had a patient named Manuel. He was 67 years old, a responsible, thoughtful, deeply disciplined man who had been living with type 2 diabetes for several years, and he was doing everything right. He took his medication every single day. He came to his checkups without fail. He walked when he could, and above all, he was extremely careful about what he ate. But there was something that kept troubling him. Every morning, when he checked his blood sugar, the numbers were higher than he wanted them to be. Not dangerously high, but not where they should be either. Not after all the effort he had been putting in. I remember he sat down in my office one afternoon and said something I hear more often than you might expect. He said, "Doctor, I feel like I'm doing everything correctly, but my body just isn't responding." I understood exactly how he felt. Because when you make sacrifices for months, sometimes for years, and the results don't come, it doesn't just feel frustrating, it starts to feel defeating. So we sat down and went through his daily habits in detail. What he was eating, when he was eating, how he was preparing his meals. And when we got to breakfast, something stood out immediately. Manuel had stopped eating eggs a long time ago. Someone had warned him that the cholesterol in eggs could be harmful to his heart. And because he was already managing diabetes, he didn't want to take any chances. He'd removed them from his diet entirely and replaced them with what he believed was a much healthier morning routine. Every morning, he was drinking a large glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, 2 slices of toast, sometimes a bowl of cereal, sometimes instant oatmeal with a little honey. Now, to most people, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable breakfast, maybe even a healthy one. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing someone with diabetes should be eating. But when we looked at what was actually happening inside his body, we discovered something very different. That breakfast was delivering a significant amount of fast-absorbing carbohydrates and very little protein. Very little of the kind of nutrient that slows down how quickly sugar enters the bloodstream. In other words, Manuel had been avoiding an egg every morning out of fear. Meanwhile, the breakfast he replaced it with was quietly spiking his blood sugar, day after day, without him ever suspecting it. We made a simple adjustment, nothing extreme. We brought eggs back into his morning routine, paired them with vegetables and other foods that support a more stable blood sugar response. A few weeks later, he came back. He looked different, more energized, less foggy, and his blood sugar readings after breakfast had become noticeably more consistent. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a cure. It was simply what happens when you understand how your body actually responds to food. And what happened with Manuel is exactly what I want to walk you through today. Because what he was experiencing is far more common than most people realize. Let's talk about something that might completely change the way you look at your morning meal. Most people with diabetes assume that their biggest blood sugar threats are the obvious ones. A piece of cake, a fizzy drink, a handful of sweets, something that clearly has sugar in it. But what I see every day in my practice tells a very different story. In many cases, the single biggest impact on blood sugar happens during the first meal of the day. And the most surprising part? It's usually coming from foods that have a reputation for being healthy. Let me explain what's happening inside your body. When you have type 2 diabetes, your pancreas is still producing insulin in most cases. The problem is that insulin isn't working as efficiently as it once did. Think of it like a key that still exists, but the lock it's supposed to open has become stiff and difficult. The glucose is trying to get into your cells, The insulin is trying to help, but the whole process has slowed down considerably. Now imagine what happens when you begin the day with a large amount of fast-absorbing carbohydrates. A slice of white toast, a glass of orange juice, a bowl of cereal, a spoonful of honey stirred into porridge. Individually, each of those things might seem harmless, and some of them carry healthy labels: whole grain, natural, fresh. But inside your bloodstream, what's happening is something very different. Think of glucose like hundreds of cars all trying to enter the same city at exactly the same time. When too many vehicles arrive simultaneously, the roads become gridlocked. Nothing moves the way it should. That is precisely what happens in your blood when a large amount of glucose enters all at once. It floods in faster than insulin can manage. Your blood sugar climbs sharply, and the higher and more sudden that climb is, the harder your body has to work to bring things back into balance. This is what I call the silent morning mistake. And I see it constantly. People who have cut out sweets, people who never add sugar to their coffee, people who genuinely believe they are eating well, but who, every single morning, are consuming a combination of foods that produces almost the same effect inside their body as eating something they would never allow themselves near. Now, contrast that with a completely different kind of breakfast. 2 eggs, some avocado, sautéed spinach or another vegetable, maybe a small amount of whole grain on the side. What changes? Quite a bit, actually. Protein acts as a natural brake, not because it removes glucose from the equation, not because it cures diabetes, but because it slows the rate at which carbohydrates are broken down and absorbed. Instead of opening a floodgate all at once, protein allows glucose to enter more gradually. The body has more time to respond. Insulin works under less pressure. The blood sugar rise tends to be gentler and more manageable. And here's what many of my patients notice after making this change. They stop feeling hungry at 10 or 11 in the morning. They have more sustained energy. They feel more alert. And that makes sense, because when blood sugar rises sharply, it also tends to fall sharply. And when it drops, the body sends signals: fatigue, cravings, brain fog, the urge to snack on something, anything, just to feel normal again. But when the morning meal contains adequate protein, satiety tends to last longer. The energy feels more even, and blood sugar through the rest of the morning is much easier to manage. This brings us to something most people have never heard of in relation to eggs: the glycemic index. Eggs have a glycemic index of essentially 0. That means they do not directly raise blood sugar in any meaningful way. But more than that, they provide protein of excellent quality, protein that creates precisely the stabilizing effect we've been discussing. Now, I want to be careful here because I am not telling you that eggs are magic. I am not telling you that eggs cure diabetes. And I am absolutely not telling you that eggs should replace your medical treatment or your doctor's guidance. What I am saying is this: the problem is not always what you eat. Very often, it is the speed at which what you eat becomes glucose inside your body. And when you understand that principle, you start to see why some apparently healthy breakfasts may have been working against you all along. So if eggs can be this useful for people with diabetes, why has there been so much fear around them? Why do so many of my patients come in having avoided eggs for years or even decades? The answer comes down to one word: cholesterol. You've probably heard some version of this at some point in your life. Be careful with eggs, they're high in cholesterol. If you have diabetes and you're worried about your heart, maybe it's better to avoid them. Play it safe. Choose something else. And I understand why people listened. When you're already managing a condition that increases cardiovascular risk, the last thing you want to do is feel like you're adding another problem. So millions of people made the cautious choice. They said goodbye to eggs. They replaced them with toast, cereals, juice, and other foods that felt safer on the surface. But here's where the story gets more complicated, because the science didn't stay still. Over the past several decades, researchers have revisited the relationship between dietary cholesterol, meaning the cholesterol you eat, and blood cholesterol, meaning what actually shows up in your blood tests. And what they found doesn't quite match the simple version we were all taught. Here is something that surprises many of my patients. Most of the cholesterol circulating in your bloodstream was not put there by the food you ate. It was produced by your own liver. Your body manufactures cholesterol continuously because it needs it. It uses cholesterol to produce hormones, to build cell membranes, and to support dozens of biological processes that keep you alive and functioning properly. Yes, food influences this process, but the relationship is not as direct as once believed. Think of your body as a factory with a production line that already has an output target. When the factory receives extra raw material from outside, meaning cholesterol from food, it often adjusts its own production to compensate. It makes less internally because it received more externally. This doesn't happen identically in every person. Some individuals are more sensitive to dietary cholesterol than others, but for many people, this regulatory capacity means that eating eggs doesn't automatically translate into a dangerous rise in blood cholesterol. Now, while all of this attention was focused on eggs, something else was happening in the background. Ultra-processed foods became a staple of modern life. Refined carbohydrates filled supermarket shelves. Sugar found its way into almost everything. And these factors, not eggs, turned out to be far more strongly connected to the kind of metabolic problems that lead to heart disease and worsening diabetes. I want to give you a simple example to illustrate what I mean. Imagine two people. Both of them eat eggs every morning. But one person surrounds those eggs with fresh vegetables, olive oil, and minimally processed foods. The other person surrounds those same eggs with pastries, processed meats, sugary drinks, and packaged snacks. Are those two people going to have the same health outcomes? Of course not. And yet, if you look only at the eggs, the comparison seems identical. This is the mistake we've been making for a long time, isolating one food, assigning it a verdict, telling people to eat it or avoid it based on that verdict alone. When in reality, health is built or damaged by patterns, not by single ingredients. And this is why I genuinely worry when someone with diabetes eliminates eggs, one of the best natural sources of high-quality protein available, out of concern for an outdated guideline, while continuing to start every morning with foods that spike their blood sugar without a second thought. I want to be completely clear about one thing. I am not saying everyone should eat eggs. I am not saying they are appropriate for every person in every situation. Individual circumstances vary enormously, and your own doctor's guidance should always take priority. What I am saying is that the automatic fear around eggs, the fear rooted in decades-old thinking that has since become far more nuanced, may be costing some people a genuinely useful nutritional tool, especially when it comes to managing hunger, improving satiety, and building a breakfast that actually supports blood sugar control. The right question is never simply, are eggs good or bad? The right question is, how do eggs fit into the overall picture of how I eat? Because when we ask that question, the whole conversation changes. Now, here's where things get very practical. Because even when people understand that eggs can be part of a sensible eating plan, I still see them making the same mistakes over and over. Mistakes that reduce most of the potential benefit. Mistakes that can still leave blood sugar running high, even though they feel like they're doing the right thing. Let me walk you through the 5 most common ones. And as I go through each one, I want you to honestly consider whether any of these are happening in your own kitchen right now. Mistake number 1, eating eggs alongside white bread every single day. This is the most widespread mistake I see. Someone prepares 2 eggs, feels good about their choice, and then adds 2 or 3 slices of white toast on the side, or a couple of bread rolls, or a large portion of white baguette. And then, when their blood sugar goes up after breakfast, they're confused. They ate eggs. They did the right thing. What went wrong? The eggs weren't the problem. The bread was. Remember the principle we talked about earlier. Protein acts as a brake on blood sugar absorption. But even the most effective brake has limits. If you add a very large amount of refined carbohydrate alongside your protein, glucose still enters the bloodstream at a rate that can be difficult to manage. This doesn't mean you can never eat bread. What it means is that the type and quantity of bread and the overall balance of your breakfast matters enormously. Often, a modest reduction in refined carbohydrates makes a far greater difference than people expect. Mistake number 2, drinking fruit juice alongside eggs. This one catches so many people off guard because it seems so obviously healthy. It's natural, it's fresh, it's fruit. But here's what changes when whole fruit becomes juice. The fiber disappears, and fiber is one of the primary mechanisms that slows glucose absorption. When you remove it, what you're left with is essentially a concentrated dose of natural sugars entering your bloodstream with very little to slow them down. I've had patients who were eating eggs every morning and genuinely couldn't understand why their blood sugar was still higher than expected after breakfast. We looked at their routine more carefully, and there it was, a large glass of freshly squeezed orange juice right alongside those eggs. The eggs weren't the issue, the juice was. And this is so important because juice feels healthy. It's not something you suspect, which is exactly why I want to make sure you're aware of it. Mistake number 3, pairing eggs with processed meats. Eggs with bacon, eggs with sausages, eggs with sliced processed ham. These combinations are popular in many households and are often the go-to breakfast for people who are trying to reduce carbohydrates. And while removing refined carbohydrates from your breakfast is generally a good direction, the choice of what to add instead matters. Processed meats tend to be high in sodium, additives, and preservatives. Consumed habitually, they introduce a different set of concerns that are worth paying attention to, especially for someone managing diabetes who is already at higher cardiovascular risk. When people hear that eggs are a good source of protein, they sometimes interpret that as permission to build a heavier and heavier breakfast around them. But more food is not always the goal. Better food is. The ideal companions for eggs for most people are vegetables, spinach, tomatoes, mushrooms, courgette, bell peppers. These add volume, nutrients, and fiber to your plate without adding a significant carbohydrate load. They make your breakfast more satisfying without making it harder on your blood sugar. Mistake number 4, eating only the egg white and discarding the yolk. This mistake comes directly from the cholesterol fear we talked about earlier. For years, the yolk was the villain. People threw it away, kept the white, and believed they were getting all the benefit while eliminating the risk. But the yolk is where most of the nutrition lives. Vitamins A, D, E, and K, B vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, compounds that support normal function in the body in ways that the egg white simply cannot replicate on its own. When you discard the yolk out of habit, out of fear rooted in information that has since evolved considerably, you are often giving up the most nutritionally valuable part of the food. Again, individual circumstances matter. Some people, based on their specific medical picture, may have genuine reasons to moderate their yolk intake. That conversation belongs with your doctor. But for the majority of people, the concern about a single egg yolk consumed within an otherwise balanced diet is often disproportionate to the actual impact. Mistake number 5, believing that more eggs automatically means better results. This last mistake is subtler, but it matters. We live in an age where people hear that a food can be beneficial and immediately think, well, if some is good, more must be better. Nutrition doesn't work that way. No single food can undo years of unhelpful habits. No single food can replace physical activity. No single food can substitute for proper medical care when it's needed. Eggs can be a useful tool, but they are one tool within a much larger strategy. The real transformation happens when what you eat for breakfast is part of a coherent lifestyle, when your overall carbohydrate choices are more thoughtful, when the foods you eat are as minimally processed as possible, when you're sleeping adequately, when you're moving your body, when you're following your doctor's recommendations consistently. I always say the same thing to my patients: don't look for miracle foods, look for intelligent habits, because it's the habits, repeated day after day, that actually build your health. And here is the genuinely encouraging part. Correcting these 5 mistakes is usually much simpler than people anticipate. You don't need an extreme diet. You don't need to spend more money. You don't need to go hungry. You simply need to understand how to use a straightforward, affordable food correctly within a well-balanced morning routine. And that is exactly what we are going to look at next. After everything we've discussed, you're probably asking the same question most of my patients ask at this point in the conversation. All right, doctor, so what does this actually look like? How should I be eating eggs if I have diabetes? And I think the most honest and helpful answer I can give you starts with a reminder. There is no single perfect breakfast that works identically for every person. Every individual has different needs, different medications, different levels of physical activity, and a different relationship with food. That's important to acknowledge. But there are principles that tend to serve most people with diabetes well, especially after 60. And those principles, when applied consistently, tend to produce results. The first and most fundamental principle is this: make sure your breakfast contains an adequate source of quality protein. For many people, 2 whole eggs can do that job beautifully. They're affordable. They're easy to prepare. They integrate naturally into a morning routine. And they provide protein that helps buffer the blood sugar response to whatever else you eat alongside them. But here is what I want to emphasize just as strongly as the eggs themselves. What surrounds them on the plate matters just as much. I've seen patients who shifted to eggs for breakfast but continued to build their meal the same way they always had. Heavy on refined carbohydrates, light on vegetables, accompanied by fruit juice and processed condiments. The eggs were there, but the overall effect was still similar to what they'd been doing before. Vegetables are the ideal companion for eggs. Spinach, tomatoes, mushrooms, peppers, courgette. These foods add volume and satisfaction to a meal without adding a significant glycemic burden. They bring fiber, micronutrients, and bulk that helps you feel genuinely full without pushing blood sugar in the wrong direction. A small amount of healthy fat is also worth considering for most people. Olive oil used in cooking, half an avocado on the side, a few walnuts. These kinds of additions work alongside the protein to slow absorption further, keeping blood sugar more stable over the following hours. The goal is to construct a breakfast where multiple elements are working together. Protein slowing things down, fiber slowing things down, healthy fat slowing things down, and carbohydrates, if present, coming from sources that are less refined and more controlled in quantity. Now, one of the most important things I've observed over more than 25 years of clinical practice is this: consistency matters more than perfection. Many of my patients spend enormous mental energy searching for the ideal breakfast. They read every article, they try every variation, and they become so focused on getting it exactly right that they end up going in circles, changing things constantly, and never settling into a rhythm that their body can actually adapt to. A good breakfast that you eat reliably every day will almost always outperform a perfect breakfast that you manage 3 times a week. Build something simple, something you can actually sustain, something that doesn't feel like a punishment every morning, and then stick with it, because the power of a habit comes from its repetition, not from its occasional perfection. I often tell my patients something that sounds simple but carries a lot of weight. It's not what you do, it's what you do consistently. Eggs alone will not control your diabetes, but eggs used intelligently as part of a morning routine that is also thoughtful about carbohydrates, rich in vegetables, low in processed ingredients, and supported by proper medical care and reasonable physical activity. That combination can make a genuine difference. A real, measurable, sustainable difference in how you feel and how your blood sugar behaves. And the beauty of it is that the change required is not dramatic. For most people, it is genuinely just a matter of reorganizing what's already on the plate. Before we finish today, I want to leave you with the one idea I most want you to take away from this conversation. For years, millions of people have been avoiding eggs, quietly, carefully, with the best intentions, because someone told them once that eggs and cholesterol and heart problems all belong together in the same sentence. And so they made the cautious choice. They put the eggs aside, and they replaced them, often, with foods that felt safer, but were quietly causing their own problems. The morning juice that seemed fresh and wholesome, the toast that seemed light and harmless, the cereal that had a health claim on the box, all of it arriving in the bloodstream as glucose, faster than the body could comfortably manage, morning after morning after morning. And here is the deeper truth that I want you to carry with you. Your health is not determined by any single food. It is built from the habits you repeat every day, from the small decisions you make in your own kitchen, your own dining room, your own home, from your understanding of how your body actually responds to what you give it. After more than 25 years working with people who live with diabetes, the lesson that has impressed me most is this: the biggest changes almost never come from complicated solutions. They come from recognizing a simple mistake that has been quietly repeating for years, and then making one clear, consistent change. Maybe that mistake was in your breakfast. Maybe it was in how you were combining your foods. Or maybe it was in a belief you accepted a long time ago and never stopped to reconsider. The good news is this: your next breakfast hasn't happened yet. Your next decision hasn't been made yet. And every single morning represents an opportunity to take one small step in the right direction. Not toward perfection, not toward a dramatic transformation overnight, just toward a slightly better choice than yesterday. Because with diabetes, it doesn't come down to changing everything at once. It comes down to making smarter decisions, one meal at a time. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Are you still eating eggs in the morning? Or did you stop years ago because of concerns about cholesterol? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this video helped you see something differently, please give it a like. It takes just a second, and it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need this kind of information. And if you know someone who is managing diabetes and struggling to get their morning blood sugar under control, please share this with them. It might be the conversation that changes something for them. Subscribe if you haven't already. New videos on health, nutrition, and living well after 60 go up regularly here on the Dr. David Ade channel. Take good care of yourself. And remember, it's not always what you eat. Very often, it's how you eat it.